talk about the best and the worst scenes in Spider-Man No Way Home, because the beginning is a little clunky. Ending is phenomenal. What are some of the best scenes that guide our experience of this film? I'm going to start with the negatives again. And again, don't let me bring your high down with any film that I talk about that I say anything negative about, because you should love what you love regardless of what I think. But I do think that the worst scene in Spider-Man No Way Home is, to me, the Doctor Strange scene where he's casting the spell so that people forget who Peter Parker is, or forget that he's Spider-Man, I should say. And the basic premise for why I think this is the worst scene is because I don't see a world in which Doctor Strange agrees to do this spell. It does not seem like something he would do. Not only that, this spell is far too convenient given the potential consequences. So in other words, I don't see, like I said, I don't see a way that Doctor Strange would agree to do this for Peter Parker. That does not make sense to me. Now, the film does need a gimmick to be able to accomplish what it needs to accomplish by bringing in the other Spideys and bringing in the villains so that we get the amazing ending that we have. It's not going to be an easy thing to pull off. So, as I say this is the worst film in the movie, I do think that under scrutiny, it sort of falls apart a little bit. But as I say that, the scene works in the context of the film. It kind of works. It doesn't go off the rails. We don't go, oh my gosh, this is just a terrible movie when you see this scene. So in other words, it may be the worst scene in the movie, but it by far is not a terrible scene. So how do the writers make this scene work? Because it's very clunky. You got to get Doctor Strange in a matter of minutes to do something that he would probably never do. and here's how they do it. Here's how they make it work. It's almost like the way that Back to the Future makes time travel work. That is to say, they make it very comedic and they make it cartoony and they make it seem like it's all like something that may happen, and it's kind of chaotic, but it's a fun chaos. And that's the way that this scene works. Because if you took us back to a tone of the Doctor Strange tone from the Doctor Strange movie, from the first Doctor Strange movie, there's no way it feels like Doctor Strange is doing this for a kid hero that he's met, right? It does not. He's going to go, you know what? I'm sorry, you just can't mess with this. And they'd have to figure out some other way. You know, maybe they have Ned, since Ned, could use some of the magic. Maybe they have Ned come in and try to do some of the spell, and maybe Ned is the one that messes it up. That seems more believable to me than Doctor Strange changing his mind in the course of a 5-minute scene and saying like, yeah, sure, I'll help you out. But the writers pull it off because there's tension in the scene, there's conflict in the scene, and they keep that humorous to the point where we know, for example, that Doctor Strange makes a joke with Wong about using the scene to forget a party that they had, right? And so you know that they're using comedy and they're using this cartooniness to be able to get through this scene in a way that we're not just going to go, I don't believe this scene, and then our suspension of disbelief is gone and we're out, right? No, they don't do that. If they tried to make this super serious and tried to convert Doctor Strange into a believer in Peter's objectives in a matter of 5 minutes, I don't think we ever would have gotten there. So that is my worst scene, just because it doesn't really seem to align with what the character of Doctor Strange would do in that circumstance or that situation. But that's enough negativity. Let's get into the best scene in this film. Now, this is why I think this film is so good. There are a ton of options for the best scene, and you and I might not actually pick the same one. So here are some of the scenes that I thought were amazing that I did not pick, and I'll let you know which one I did pick in a second. The arrival of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, and even as that bleeds into them meeting Peter and then going on to try and create cures for the villains, those are all fantastic scenes. The way that they incorporate Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire into this film is exceptional. We talked about that earlier. the way that they're able to say, you knew these characters from other films, they're going to look and feel and act like they did in those films, maybe just a little older versions of those characters. And the way that they're able to relate those into the MCU, taking Sony characters that had nothing, the MCU wasn't even around at that point in time. Now, granted, Kevin Feige did have a role in the Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he had some oversight of that, the Sam Raimi versions there. But the way that they're incorporated here shows a real understanding of who those characters were and how they might show up in this film. So that's fantastic. But I didn't pick that as my best. The Doc Ock fight on the freeway, despite the fact that it comes at a weird part of the movie in terms of the structure of the film, that fight is visually awesome. And the way that they're doing the CG, the way that Tom Holland is kind of trying to deal with saving the educational administrator, the MIT, the lady from MIT, the way he's trying to save her and the way that Doc Ock is attacking, phenomenal. All that stuff is great, visually amazing. Aunt May's death, which marks the midpoint of the film, is done extraordinarily well. If you thought that Tom Holland, which we already know because we've all seen Endgame, we've all seen Tom in these other roles. If you thought Tom Holland couldn't handle emotional scenes, then you're totally wrong because this kid is amazing in emotional scenes. Does a great job dealing with the death of Aunt May. She does a great job of delivering with great power comes great responsibility, which is a big Spider-Man theme and usually comes from Uncle Ben. The fact that she delivers it here and does that well is phenomenal. And another moment from a scene, because the whole final battle has a bunch of great moments, but maybe my favorite moment in that entire scene, because you could pick that scene, which is an extended scene, you could pick that scene as just full of amazing moments. You've got the Garfield-Maguire interaction where Tobey Maguire is telling Andrew Garfield Spider-Man that he's amazing, right? That's great. But my favorite moment in that big scene, in that long scene, my favorite moment is actually when Andrew Garfield Spider-Man saves MJ. Because we know going back that was something that he was not able to do in his films. And so that moment, even though we don't stay in that moment for a very long period of time, for a fan of Spider-Man and somebody who's seen all these films, that moment is phenomenal. And the fact that they were able to pull it off so quickly, have it mean so much, is again, storytellers who understand the stories that have come before, understand the trauma that was induced on the characters in those stories, and then able to play that out is just, it's really good storytelling, especially from a franchise model. Drawing stories in that were not a part of this franchise, and now they're making them a part of this franchise and doing it so well is pretty remarkable. So I think that is really, really cool. Now, I've gone on and on about all these really cool scenes and all these really cool moments. What is the best scene in this film? And this is where it's going to get controversial because you may not agree with this, but I love this scene. My favorite scene, what I think is the best scene in Spider-Man No Way Home, is when Peter Parker walks into the diner at the end of the film. Now, why would I say that? Why is the ending of this film so powerful? Well, the first thing is that it proves that Peter's actions have real consequences in the real world. A lot of times with superhero films, it's going to get retconned, it's going to get figured out, and this probably will too at some point, right? But the fact that Peter comes into this space and has to deal with his poor decision-making from earlier in the film, and that's caught up with him here, is amazing. So Doctor Strange, in the worst scene, by the way, which still means it's a pretty decent scene because I'm bringing that up as being meaningful to the film. But Doctor Strange, when he's casting the spell for Peter, he says, the problem is not Mysterio, it's you trying to live two different lives. So the consequences of living two separate lives plays itself out to the point where Peter can't be with his best friend or with the girl that he loves, the woman that he loves. At the beginning of the film, the worst scene has to be played for comedy because Peter isn't thinking through his actions, right? And Doctor Strange probably wouldn't do this for him. So it has to be played as kind of comedy, just like Back to the Future plays with its time travel, not as a scientific idea, but as this like whole thing that like, hey, it's just a gimmick, people. It's just a gimmick. Just go along with it because it's going to create greater things to come, right? Both of these films do that. And then we go, okay, we'll go with it. We'll kind of go with it. I do think Back to the Future does a slightly better job with its gimmick than does Spider-Man No Way Home, but that's an aside. But the point is that Peter's desire to have everything the way that he wants it to be, talked a lot about this in last week's show about wanting to be our own gods, right? Where we could say, I want everything to work out for me and everything to be good for me. Well, basically, this is Peter saying, I'm going to mess with reality because my life's kind of difficult and it would be easier if I didn't have to deal with this. And now he has to, in this diner scene at the very end of the film, where he goes to see MJ and see Ned, people who no longer remember him, now he has to figure out, okay, how do I get back into their good graces? I want to be in love again. I want to be with my best friend again. And he can't do it. He can't do it. So that's why I think that scene is so powerful. The consequences for Peter's earlier actions, doing something that he should not have done, the character development of him saying, I'm going to have to deal with this, to the point where he makes a choice for the world to forget that he's Spider-Man. The consequences are pretty severe, and Peter has to feel those. And that's when this film at the very, very end becomes very bittersweet. And I think that in a Spider-Man film with Tom Holland, where this is mostly fun times, that is a pretty compelling way to end this film, and a very interesting way of ending this film. So that's why the diner scene to me is the best scene. The end scene is the best scene, in my opinion, as it relates to Spider-Man No Way Home.